So let's discuss getting your watch serviced. So you're thinking it's about that time that you send it in and get serviced. Here are some things that you need to know before you get this done. So before we get this topic going, go ahead and hit that subscribe link right now and don't miss any more videos. So let's start with the basics. Number one, what is watch servicing? This doesn't include swapping out a battery on a quartz watch. This is more referred to a mechanical movement watch. Now, these things don't run forever, although some of them do. But the thing is, all these pieces have been assembled very carefully, and when all the jewels and all the parts, they have been lubed. And what happens is when watches sit for quite some time or they're used for a very long time, these oils and lubricants dry up. Things start to happen with the watch where either they start moving too fast or moving too slow, or they even right out stop. Most of the times it's caused by the lubrication in the movement drying up. Sometimes when you don't service your watch, what happens is you start getting premature wear. Most of the time when someone says service, what they mean is to have the movement overhauled. Now, remember guys, this is a very interesting piece of machinery. You can't just open a case back, spray it with some WD-40 and call it a day. This needs to be completely disassembled by a professional, put in a special machine where all the parts are washed and free of any debris, and then they're carefully inspected, reassembled, and then fine-tuned. People don't understand, when you do a service, it's not that fast. It's something that needs to be done in certain steps and methodically. There really is no magic way that you can get a service done without fully disassembling the movement. That is the correct way to do it. Another thing is polishing. A lot of people, when they say service, I'm not really quite sure if they mean polish the watch or service the movement. Servicing most of the time is referred to as an overhaul of the movement. A lot of times when you get this done, they will offer to refinish the watch. I think at that moment, if it's a watch that you want to have it refinished, it might be the right time to get this done. Of course, at that moment as well, since they disassembled the whole piece, they go ahead and check all the seals and all that and fix any problems you might have, whether it's waterproofing or anything of that nature. So pretty much a service or overhaul on your movement is like a tune-up on the engine inside your watch. Now the next one's gonna be, where should you overhaul your watch? That really is up to you. If you want to send it back to the manufacturer, that's always a safe bet, as long as it's going directly to the manufacturer, because there are many ADs, I'm telling you from experience, that offer all these services, but they don't necessarily take them directly to the manufacturer. Over here where I'm from, the local ADs for a brand like Rolex, the most popular ones, the ones everybody know, I have seen them do services on watches that are horrendous. Horrendous. You can't even believe it, especially when it comes to the refinishes. I have sat there and just been in disbelief. But if the watch does go back to the original manufacturer, then it should be correct. And one of the benefits of that, at least, is that you have the whole feel good that it went back to the manufacturer along with the warranty. However, I don't always think that that is the right option. One of the main reasons, number one, is time. These people are not sitting back and waiting for you. And actually, no good watchmaker is sitting there waiting for you to decide you want to overhaul your piece. So when you send it back to the factory, you're gonna have to play the waiting game. It could be 2 months, it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months. There are certain pieces, however, whether they're exotic tourbillons or perpetual calendars, where in reality, I think the right thing to do is send it back to the manufacturer. It's just one of those watches where things could get complicated and you want it in their hands for that. Now, if you decide to take it to an independent watchmaker, then I guess the question no longer is where you're gonna take it, but to who you're gonna take it to. You need to make sure this is somebody that's very well recommended. And you also have to think, who is recommending me this guy? You can't take financial advice from a guy that has bad credit, can you? Or someone that has a complete disaster when it comes to money. The same thing with the watches. Just because so-and-so tells you, oh, take it to this guy, he's the best. I mean, does this guy really know what is the best? How are his watches in conditions? Has he seen enough of them to know that this person is the best? Because just because you're a watchmaker doesn't mean you're the best. And the same goes for doctors, engineers, architects, all that. Now, I also want to say that a really good watchmaker is definitely not waiting for you to bring his watch. Usually there's going to be a waiting list and he has work. I always like to think that a really, really good watchmaker already has left the brands and has his own practice. But again, you gotta get recommendations. It's the same thing as when you buy the watch in the gray market. You need to buy the seller before you buy the watch. And the same goes for the watchmaking. Buy the watchmaker. Now, who you should take it to also will apply depending on what happens to the watch. If it's a special watch with a special green dial and you ended up getting water damage or the crystal broke and scratched the glass, then you kind of really don't have a lot of options. You're gonna have to send it back to the manufacturer, because a lot of times these independent watchmakers, when it comes to these very special parts like a limited edition dial or something, they're not gonna be able to get it. So that is something you wanna keep in mind, is that a responsible independent watchmaker as well will tell you, I can't fix this, send it back to the factory. So some of the advantages that I think you have from taking it to an independent watchmaker is that one is time. A lot of times you can cut that time in half over sending it to the manufacturer. And another thing is the expense. I also like the fact that it's a bit more of a personalized experience as opposed to just be throwing into the munching machine from the big brands. It's kind of really the way the experience usually goes. They don't really try to work with you or resolve something. All they ever want to do is take your existing pieces off and slap brand new ones, where a lot of times an independent watchmaker can really give your watch what it needs and nothing more. Another important thing I want to point out is that I have a lot of experience with watchmakers. In my block, there's probably about 25 different watchmakers and I only use 3 of them, okay? Just because you're a really good watchmaker doesn't mean you're a really good refinisher. It's 2 different arts in my opinion, and some guys possess both powers. They're able to refinish and they're able to be a good watchmaker. I just think some guys can't do both. Just keep that in mind, okay? Another good thing I want to point out as well is if you have like a vintage piece, you might want to take it to a vintage watchmaker. That's also very important, is who you're taking it to, make sure they specialize in what you do or are very familiar with what you're about to drop off. So the next thing is, when should I take my watch to get serviced? I get this question a lot. I know that sounds kind of corny, but yes, people ask me this all the time. And the first thing that comes to mind is that, look, this isn't your grandfather's Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham that needs to get an oil change every 3,000 miles. That's not the way this works. Some people will sit there and tell you, well, you need to service the watch every 3, 4 years, 2 years. I disagree. I think you should service the watch when it needs it, when it starts showing signs that it needs to have an overhaul. I think there's really no need to be having the watch disassembled and taken apart and this and that so many times for no reason. I have watches that have never had an overhaul ever. And I've had the watch for 20 years and it still runs perfect. Then again, I have sold brand new watches to clients, brand new from Rolex, that have needed service 2 years later. Maybe they're doing it on purpose because they want you to send the watches back in, AKA burning all the people that flipped them. I mean, I don't know. There could be many reasons why. But I like to say that it needs service when the watch stops. Don't get me wrong, if you're hearing obvious sounds inside the watch that are like cranking or grinding or something doesn't feel right, something is obviously not right, like you're adjusting the crown and there's like a grinding in there, or it's skipping a gear, or the rotor is wearing out because it has wear and it's grinding against the movement. I mean, you can hear these things. You definitely don't want to keep using it there, because all you're doing is just causing excess wear and damage. But if the watch is running fine, let it be. Let it live its life. A lot of times the manufacturers or, the uptight watch heads are gonna sit there and say, oh, I service my watch every 3 years. Again, I think it's a bunch of BS. I don't really worry about that. I don't use watch winders. I don't do none of that stuff. Trust me, you don't need it. A watch winder is just part of the novelty. In my opinion, it's just using the watch more and more and more and more. There's two bad things to watches. One, letting it sit. And number two, overusing it, which would be on a watch winder. I like to be somewhere in the middle. I like to use my watches and rotate them so that way they don't just sit there and dry up. I think that if the watch is running fine, just let it be. And if you're losing 5 seconds a day, I mean, does it really matter? I mean, unless you have a job or a career that you're saving lives, okay? And you need to have accurate timing within the last 12 to 24 hours, then just buy an Apple Watch or something like that. You know, mechanical watch is something that's kind of like a novelty nowadays. So it's gonna be close, but they're not gonna be perfect. So keep that in mind. Just because it slows down a very little, doesn't really mean you have to tear it down and redo it. That's just at least my opinion. In this part of when, I also like to talk about refinishing or polishing, okay? People ask me, when should I refinish my watch? Well, see, that's a little bit different. You don't have to do it every 2, 3, 4 years. I say do it when you feel that the watch is already scratched up enough that you wanna make it look new, okay? If you have it refinished by the right guy, it's like if it never got refinished. It's only if you take it to the wrong guy that your watch will age drastically and look like total shit because the wrong person touched it. But keep in mind, just because you scratch the bottom of your buckle or one of your lugs got a little nick, does not mean you need to polish the watch. Let it be. Let it wear that little bit of character. You know, let it show some signs of use. That's part of the beauty of it. You put those marks. You have it. So keep that in mind. Polish it, but don't do it all the time. Do it when you really absolutely feel it needs it. Last is gonna be if you should service your watch. Now, I know it's kind of weird. You're wondering, well, if the watch is broken or stopped working, then obviously you should do it. But if applies more to, for example, a very rare vintage Rolex. You know, something with a special dial. You know, let's say it has a Tiffany & Co. dial, you know. Should you have the watch service? That's a big question. I would say I definitely would not send it back to Rolex. I wouldn't send any vintage watch to Rolex, just being honest with you. All you hear is always the horror stories, you know. In the past, you would hear all these crazy stories about that so-and-so sent this watch to go get serviced in the Diamond District, and they swapped out parts and did this and did that. I think Rolex is the #1 brand that does this. You send them a special watch with a unique characteristic on a dial or the hands, and then they go ahead and throw away the hands and put service hands and swap your dial and pretty much ruin the whole value of the piece. I would say that's one of the first things you have to think about. I have to use Rolex for this example, but so I got this super special Rolex and I want to get it serviced. I don't even think I should get it serviced. Should I send it to Rolex? Send it to a specialist. And always think about that. There's times that you probably just shouldn't touch the watch. Let's say you have a family heirloom, a vintage Omega from the 50s that was your grandfather's. And you know, maybe perhaps the bracelet or something is hanging by a string. Are you really gonna wear the watch, or are you just gonna keep it as a family heirloom? If I was gonna keep it as a family heirloom, I would just leave it as is. I just wouldn't even polish it or have it serviced. There's also some watches, like perhaps some vintage watches, that have never been polished or serviced ever. And they look pretty good. They don't have a lot of scratches. They look like normal wear. I would say that's one of those watches that you should never service, period. Just let it be. Unless it breaks and you can't take it like that anymore, then obviously you gotta do it. Another thing is brand new watches. Again, unless you break it, unless you tragically crack the ceramic bezel or something of that nature, don't touch them. Those are just my thoughts. So whether you're into watch collecting or just love mechanical watches, if you have them long enough, you're gonna reach that moment where you may have to do service. So these are some things you might wanna keep in mind and always review before you send it out. So comment below if there's anything else you wanna add to this topic. And if you like this video, like and share it. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel.